May 1940. German forces control most of Europe. Poland crushed in weeks. France defeated in 40 days. The British army driven into the sea at Dunkirk. Germany is unstoppable. 5 years later, Berlin is in ruins. The German army has ceased to exist. The leadership is dead. The country is divided and occupied. What happened between those two moments? This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't superior enemy tactics. It wasn't even the atomic bomb, which was never used in Europe. This was systematic strategic incompetence on a scale the world had never seen. Between 1940 and 1945, a series of decisions, each one worse than the last, turned inevitable victory into catastrophic defeat. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how the most powerful military machine in history destroyed itself. Not through battlefield defeats, but through 10 strategic blunders so profound that defeat became mathematically inevitable. And here's what you need to understand before we begin. These weren't random mistakes. They were connected. Each blunder made the next one more likely. Each failure put Germany in a weaker position for the next decision. By 1943, Germany was locked into a trajectory that could only end one way. So the question isn't whether Germany lost. The question is, could they have won if just one of these decisions had been different? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the answer might surprise you. But first, we need to talk about the single greatest missed opportunity in military history. Before we dive in, if you're interested in deep dive historical analysis of World War II strategy and decision-making using primary sources and academic research, I'd really appreciate if you'd hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. And as we go through these 10 blunders, drop a comment telling me which one you think was the most catastrophic. I read every comment and I'm genuinely curious what you think. All right, let's get into it. Summer 1940. France has surrendered. The British Army evacuated at Dunkirk, abandoning nearly all its heavy equipment on the beaches. Britain stands alone. Germany controls the entire European coastline from Norway to Spain. The German army is the most powerful land force on Earth. The Luftwaffe outnumbers the RAF in total aircraft, but the advantage is smaller than it appears. German fighters can only stay over Britain for about 20 minutes before running out of fuel. And British factories are producing new fighters faster than Germany can destroy them. This is the moment. And yet, Germany waits. Why? Why didn't Germany invade when Britain was at its weakest? The answer reveals something fundamental about the German military, a weakness that would cost them the entire war. But before I explain that, you need to understand just how close Britain came to disaster. The plan was called Operation Sea Lion. Hitler issued the directive on July 16, 1940. The invasion was scheduled for September, but the plan required 3 conditions, all of which had to be met simultaneously. Complete air superiority over the English Channel, naval superiority to protect the invasion fleet, heavy artillery controlling the Dover-Calais Strait. Germany achieved none of them. The Luftwaffe launched the Battle of Britain, waves of bombers attacking British airfields, trying to destroy the Royal Air Force on the ground. It didn't work. The RAF fought back, and something unexpected happened. The longer the battle went on, the stronger the British became. Factories churned out replacement aircraft faster than Germany could destroy them. American supplies began arriving. Pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and across the Commonwealth joined the fight. By September, the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority. The invasion was postponed, then postponed again, and then Germany made a decision that changed everything. They gave up, not officially. The invasion was never formally cancelled, but by late 1940, German leadership had moved on to other plans. Here's what most people don't understand about this decision. The problem wasn't that Germany tried to invade and failed. The problem was that Germany's military system, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, couldn't even agree on how to invade in the first place. The Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, was a continental force designed for coastal defense. It had no experience with large-scale amphibious operations. Their invasion fleet was a collection of river barges, tugboats, and converted merchant ships. The Luftwaffe, the Army, and the Navy were essentially planning 3 different invasions. They couldn't coordinate, they didn't have the equipment, and they fundamentally didn't understand the kind of operation they were attempting. So Britain survived, and that single fact guaranteed Germany would lose the war. Because every month Britain remained in the fight, 3 things happened. American supplies poured into British ports. British factories increased production. Britain became a permanent base for future Allied operations. When D-Day came in 1944, it launched from Britain. When American bombers began destroying German cities in 1943, they flew from British airfields. When Germany needed to defend France, it was because Britain provided the springboard for invasion. But Germany's leadership wasn't thinking about any of that in summer 1940, because they were about to make a decision that was even worse. A decision so catastrophic that it would define the entire rest of the war. A decision to invade the largest country on earth while still fighting Britain. That decision was Operation Barbarossa, June 22nd, 1941. At 3:15 in the morning, over 3 million German troops crossed the Soviet border in the largest military invasion in human history. The German High Command estimates the war will be over in 6 to 8 weeks. Hitler himself says, "All we've got to do is kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." They were wrong. Catastrophically, historically, civilization-changingly wrong. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just a military mistake. This was the moment where political ideology completely overrode strategic reality. And the evidence for that is in the invasion plan itself. Let me walk you through the German plan. The German General Staff calculated correctly that the Soviet Union had massive reserves of manpower. Their estimate was the Soviets could mobilize about 2 million reserve troops over 6 months. The actual number? 4 million in 10 days. They were off by a factor of 12. But here's what's even more remarkable. German logistics officers warned that their supply lines couldn't sustain an invasion deeper than 300 miles. The distance from the German border to Moscow? Over 600 miles. Professional military planners looked at these numbers and said, "This is impossible." The invasion proceeded anyway. Why? Because the entire plan was based on an ideological assumption that the Soviet state was a rotten structure that would collapse under pressure, that the Slavic population was inferior, that Soviet leadership was incompetent. None of those things were true. The invasion began in June. By December, German forces were outside Moscow, freezing, undersupplied, and exhausted. The quick victory never came. The Soviet government didn't collapse. Stalin didn't flee. Instead, Soviet forces counterattacked, and now Germany was fighting on 2 fronts: Britain to the west, the Soviet Union to the east. Every strategic principle in military history says you don't do that. you don't open a second front before finishing the first. But Germany did it anyway. And then, 5 months later, they did something even more inexplicable. Remember how I said Germany was fighting on 2 fronts? By December 1941, they were about to be fighting on 3. Because on December 11th, 1941, Germany did something that military historians still struggle to explain. They declared war on the United States of America, voluntarily. Now, you might be thinking, wait, didn't Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Wasn't Germany obligated to help? No. And the reason why reveals one of the greatest intelligence failures in military history. Let me show you exactly what happened. December 7th, 1941, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. The United States declares war on Japan the next day. Germany's treaty with Japan, the Tripartite Pact, was a defensive alliance. Article 3 stated that Germany was obligated to help if Japan was attacked. Japan was the aggressor. Germany had a legal way out. 4 days later, on December 11th, Germany declared war on the United States anyway. Let me be very clear about what this meant. The United States had the largest industrial economy in the world. American factories could outproduce Germany by a factor of 3 or 4 to 1. Germany had no way to attack the American mainland, no navy that could cross the Atlantic, no air force with the range to bomb American cities, no army that could land troops in North America. But America could absolutely reach Germany. American bombers could strike Berlin. American ships could supply Britain. American troops could land in Europe. So the strategic calculus was simple. Germany was declaring war on an enemy it couldn't hit, but who could definitely hit back. Why would any military leadership do that? Here's what German leadership didn't know. 9 months earlier, in March 1941, before Pearl Harbor, the United States and Britain had held secret military talks in Washington. They were called the ABC-1 conferences, and they had agreed on a plan. If the United States entered the war, its primary strategic objective would be the early defeat of Germany. Europe first. Germany as the main target. The full weight of American industrial power focused on destroying the German military. This wasn't a contingency plan. This was a signed, agreed-upon strategic framework. When Germany declared war in December, they didn't just bring America into the conflict, they activated a pre-existing Allied plan that had been designed specifically to destroy them. Within hours of Germany's declaration, the United States Congress met. The Senate vote to declare war on Germany. 88-0. The House of Representatives, 393-0. Not a single dissenting vote. Germany's declaration had done something the American government couldn't do on its own. It had unified the entire country behind the war effort instantly. So now Germany was fighting Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, and the Soviet front was about to reveal another catastrophic miscalculation. Because while Germany was declaring war on new enemies, something was happening deep in the Soviet interior. Something that German intelligence said was impossible. Let me tell you a story that most history books skip over. Because this story explains why Germany lost the Eastern Front before a single decisive battle was even fought. This is the story of the greatest industrial feat in human history. In summer 1941, as German forces advanced into Soviet territory, Soviet workers began disassembling entire factories. Not just the equipment, the entire factory, buildings, machinery, workers, engineers, records, everything. And they moved them, hundreds of miles, sometimes thousands. Let me give you a specific example. The T-34 tank factory in Kharkov. This facility produced the Soviet Union's most effective tank, the T-34. The Germans were advancing toward the city. Soviet planners made a decision. Move the entire factory. They disassembled it, loaded it onto trains, and moved it 2,000 kilometers east to the Ural Mountains, beyond the reach of German bombers. Not just the machinery. 30,000 workers. 10,000 machine tools. The chief designer, Alexander Morozov, personally supervised the relocation. They did this while German forces were fighting their way towards the city. Here's another one. The Chelyabinsk Steel Works. Critical for tank production. Workers were given 75 days to relocate and rebuild the facility. They completed it in 56 days. Think about what that means. They disassembled a steel mill, moved it across a country the size of a continent, and rebuilt it in less than 2 months, working around the clock, living in tents, on frozen ground in a Siberian winter. They laid new railway tracks, reassembled 18 machine shops, connected compressed air systems, all while temperatures dropped below freezing. By late 1941, these relocated factories were producing tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. And the production numbers are staggering. In 1942, the Soviet Union produced 24,851 tanks. Germany produced 5,452. That's not a typo. The Soviets built almost 5 tanks for every 1 German tank. Soviet aircraft production, double the German rate. Artillery favored the Soviets. Small arms favored the Soviets. Ammunition favored the Soviets. German forces were destroying Soviet equipment on the battlefield faster than Germany could replace its own losses. Meanwhile, Soviet production kept increasing, and here's something American intelligence noticed that German intelligence missed. In late 1940 and early 1941, before the invasion, American military attachés in Moscow reported something strange. They saw machinery and skilled workers moving east. Months before Barbarossa began, the Soviets were preparing. They knew the invasion was coming, so Germany was now fighting an enemy with superior production capacity and unlimited manpower. But production doesn't win battles. Tactics do. Strategy does. Professional military leadership does. And that's where Germany's next blunder comes in. Because while the Soviets were learning to trust their generals, Germany was doing the opposite. The German military built its reputation on something called Auftragstaktik, mission-based command. The idea was simple. Give your subordinate commanders an objective, trust them to figure out how to achieve it, and don't micromanage the details. It's what made the German army so effective in 1939 and 1940. By 1942, that system had been completely destroyed. Here's how it worked in practice. Summer 1942. German forces are advancing toward Stalingrad and the Caucasus oil fields. The plan requires splitting forces between 2 objectives. Professional military officers argue this violates basic doctrine. You don't divide your strength when attacking. The order comes down anyway. Split the forces. This happened over and over. December 1941. German forces are outside Moscow in the middle of a brutal Russian winter. Generals request permission to withdraw to defensive positions where they can regroup and wait for spring. The answer: no. Hold every position. No retreats. Thousands of German soldiers froze to death holding ground that had no strategic value. Equipment broke down and was abandoned. Units were destroyed defending positions that could have been retaken later. Professional military judgment was replaced with ideological determination. And here's what makes this even more remarkable. The Soviets did the exact opposite. In 1941, Stalin made the same mistake. He refused to allow retreats. He ordered units to hold pointless positions. Soviet casualties were catastrophic. But by 1943, Stalin had learned. He began trusting his generals. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky were given operational freedom. Soviet military planning became increasingly professional. Meanwhile, German command structure became more rigid, more dysfunctional, more divorced from military reality. The two systems effectively crossed paths. The professional German military became ideologically rigid. The ideological Soviet military became professionally competent. And this rigid command structure, this refusal to trust professional military judgment, was about to cause the single greatest disaster in German military history. A disaster so complete that it shattered the myth of German invincibility. A disaster where an entire army of 300,000 men was destroyed. Not in a battle, in a trap. That disaster was Stalingrad. August 1942. German forces reached the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The city has symbolic value. It's named after Stalin. Capturing it would be a propaganda victory. But from a strategic perspective, Stalingrad isn't particularly important. The real objective is the Caucasus oil fields to the south. Germany desperately needs that oil. German forces get pulled into urban combat, street fighting, house-to-house battles, the kind of warfare that negates every German advantage in tanks and aircraft. Months pass, casualties mount, more troops are committed. The symbolic value of the city becomes more important than the strategic objective. And then, in November, the Soviets do something brilliant. They don't attack Stalingrad directly, they attack somewhere else entirely. November 19th through 23rd, 1942. Operation Uranus. Soviet forces launch a massive counter-offensive, not against Stalingrad, but against the flanks. The positions are held by Romanian and Italian units with inferior equipment and lower morale. The flanks collapse. Soviet armored columns drive deep behind German lines. They meet west of Stalingrad, completing the encirclement. Approximately 300,000 German and Axis troops are trapped inside the pocket. And here's where the decision that defined the entire disaster was made. November 23rd and 24th. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the 6th Army, sends urgent requests to High Command. His message is clear. We need to break out immediately. Escape routes still exist. If we move now, the army survives. The reply comes back from Hitler's headquarters. No, hold Stalingrad. The Luftwaffe will supply you by air. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring personally promises Hitler that the Luftwaffe can deliver 500 tons of supplies daily. The 6th Army needs at least 700 tons per day just to survive. The Luftwaffe delivers an average of 117 tons per day. By December, troops are starving. Medical supplies run out. The temperature drops to -40 degrees. January 1943. Soviet forces begin the final assault. February 2nd, 1943. The 6th Army surrenders. 91,000 German soldiers march into Soviet captivity. Let me tell you what happened to them. Of those 91,000 prisoners, only 5,000 to 6,000 ever returned home. That's a survival rate of about 5.5%. Most died of starvation, disease, and forced labor in Siberian camps. The numbers for the entire battle are staggering. Total Axis casualties: over 800,000 dead, wounded, missing, or captured. Soviet forces recovered 250,000 Axis corpses in and around Stalingrad. Soviet casualties were even higher, over 1 million. 40,000 civilians died. But here's the strategic difference. The Soviets could replace their losses. Germany couldn't. And Stalingrad wasn't an isolated mistake, because the order that destroyed the Sixth Army, hold at all costs, no retreat, would be repeated again and again across the Eastern Front, creating pocket after pocket, disaster after disaster. Let me show you why. Quick reminder, if you're finding this analysis valuable and you haven't already, please take a second to like this video. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm and lets me know this type of deep dive content is what you want to see more of. Alright, back to the story. Military doctrine is very clear on this point. You hold important positions, you trade ground for time when necessary, you preserve your forces for counterattacks, you don't waste troops defending positions you can't hold. By 1943, Germany was doing the opposite. Korsun, January through February 1944. German forces encircled, 60,000 troops trapped, same pattern as Stalingrad. Multiple other pockets across the Eastern Front. Demyansk, home. Velikiye Luki, every time the same orders. Hold fast, no retreat. Every time, Soviet forces simply encircled the position and destroyed it. And here's the tragic irony. The reason Hitler kept issuing these no-retreat orders was because of a success. The Demyansk pocket, February through April 1942. 100,000 German troops encircled. The Luftwaffe managed to supply them by air. They eventually broke out. It worked. 8 months later, when Stalingrad was encircled, Göring promised he could repeat the victory from Demyansk. What he failed to mention: Demyansk was 100,000 men. Stalingrad was 300,000. The supply requirements were 3 times higher. The distance was farther. The weather was worse. The successful airlift at Demyansk created a fatal precedent that made the disaster at Stalingrad seem viable. So Germany was losing entire armies on the Eastern Front. But they were also fighting in Italy and France and the Balkans and Norway. And here's the problem with that. When you're trying to defend everywhere, you end up defending nowhere. Summer 1944, before D-Day. Germany has approximately 60 divisions in France and the Low Countries, 150 divisions in Russia, 20 divisions in Italy, garrison forces in Norway, Denmark, the Balkans. These forces can't support each other. Troops in France can't help in Russia. Forces in Italy can't quickly reach France, and the Allies can choose where to attack. The German High Command has to guess. Where will the main blow fall? They guess wrong. They expect the main Soviet offensive in summer 1944 to hit Army Group North Ukraine in the south. So they strip forces from Army Group Center in Belorussia and send them south. They redeploy 1/3 of Army Group Center's artillery, half of its tank destroyers, and 88% of its tanks. This leaves Army Group Center hollowed out. June 22nd, 1944. Operation Bagration. The Soviets attack Army Group Center, exactly where Germany is weakest. They don't just break through the lines. They disintegrate an entire army group. It's the worst German defeat of the entire war. Worse than Stalingrad in terms of forces lost. And it happened because Germany was trying to defend everywhere and ended up defending nowhere strongly enough. By late 1944, Germany was losing the war of production, losing the war of manpower, losing ground on every front. So German leadership made a desperate gamble. They decided that instead of building more conventional weapons, they'd pursue a technological miracle. Wonder weapons that would change the rules of war. It didn't work. Late 1943. German engineers are developing revolutionary technologies, jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, new tank designs. Some of these weapons were genuinely advanced. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter was faster than any Allied aircraft. The V-2 rocket was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. Here's the problem. Germany didn't need wonder weapons. Germany needed more of the weapons that already worked. Let me tell you about the Messerschmitt Me-262. In its first major engagement, 5 or 6 Me-262s attacked American bomber formations. They scored 6 confirmed kills with 0 losses. The aircraft was a technological marvel. Faster, better armed, completely superior to anything the Allies had. Germany built about 1,430 of them. Only about 300 ever saw combat. They never had more than 36 in the air at the same time. 36 aircraft, against Allied bomber fleets of 2,000 aircraft conducting daily raids. Why so few? The real bottleneck was the engine, the Junkers Jumo 004 jet engine. It was catastrophically unreliable. It required complete overhaul every 10 to 25 hours of flight time. And it required strategic materials Germany didn't have: nickel, cobalt, molybdenum. They had to use inferior substitute materials, which made the engines even more unreliable. The Germans also made a strategic decision in mid-1943 to convert some Me-262s into bombers, which diverted about 30% of production and delayed fighter deployment by several months. But the real tragedy? In one Allied bombing raid, 60 Me-262s were destroyed on the ground before they ever saw combat. And then there was the V-2 rocket program. Germany spent an estimated amount that exceeded 50% of what America spent on the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. The V-2 caused some damage to London, but it had 0 strategic impact on the war. Those resources could have built thousands of conventional aircraft or tanks that might have actually made a difference. By late 1943, German leadership knew they couldn't win a conventional war of production against the Soviets and Americans. So the wonder weapon strategy was a desperate gamble, trying to find a technological silver bullet that would bypass their industrial deficit. They were no longer trying to win the war of production. They were trying to change the rules of war itself. It didn't work. By late 1944, the strategic situation was hopeless. The Soviets were advancing from the east, the Western Allies from the west. German cities were being bombed around the clock. The rational decision was to seek terms and end the war. Germany fought on for another 6 months, and that final decision cost more lives than any other. By late 1944, professional military assessment was unanimous. The war was lost. Continuing to fight would only increase casualties and destruction. Germany fought on until May 1945. Why? What did those final 6 months accomplish? More German soldiers died. More German cities were destroyed. More civilians died in bombing raids. More prisoners in camps died before liberation. Berlin fell in May 1945 after brutal street fighting that killed tens of thousands. The city was reduced to rubble. Soviet forces took massive casualties. German defenders died by the thousands. None of it changed the outcome. By 1945, military strategy was no longer relevant to German decision-making. Hitler had stated as early as 1942 that if the German people couldn't win, then it should disappear. The decision to fight to the end wasn't a strategic choice. It was the fulfillment of a self-destructive ideology. The regime's goal was no longer victory. It was Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods, an apocalyptic end designed to pull the entire nation down with it. So those are the 10 blunders. Number 1, not invading Britain, giving Britain time to become a permanent Allied base. Number 2, invading the Soviet Union before defeating Britain, opening an unwinnable two-front war. Number 3, declaring war on the United States, adding a third enemy with unlimited industrial capacity. Number 4, underestimating Soviet industrial production, assuming it would collapse when it actually increased. Number 5, micromanaging generals, replacing professional military judgment with ideological determination. Number 6, Stalingrad, losing an entire army for symbolic rather than strategic value. Number 7, refusing strategic retreats, sacrificing units to hold worthless ground. Number 8, dispersing forces across multiple fronts, defending nowhere strongly enough. Number 9, prioritizing wonder weapons over mass production of proven designs. Number 10, fighting to the bitter end, causing 6 more months of pointless destruction. Notice what's not on this list. Moral failures. War crimes. Those were catastrophic in their own right, but they're not what we're analyzing here. We're looking at pure strategic decision-making. And what we see is a pattern. Each mistake made the next one more likely. Each failure put Germany in a weaker position. By 1943, Germany was locked into a trajectory that could only end in defeat. So could Germany have won with different strategic choices? Most military historians say no. The combined industrial power of Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States was simply too great. But some historians argue that different choices in 1940 and 1941 might have led to a negotiated peace. If Britain had been invaded successfully in 1940, if Germany hadn't attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, if the war had remained limited to Western Europe, we'll never know. What we do know is this: the strategic decisions Germany actually made led directly to total defeat. And that's the lesson. Strategy matters. Professional military judgment matters. Knowing when you're beaten matters. Germany in 1939 had the most powerful military in the world. By 1945, that military was destroyed, not because of lack of courage, not because of inferior equipment, because of systematic strategic failures that made defeat inevitable. Those are the 10 strategic blunders that lost World War II for Germany. If you found this analysis useful, I'd appreciate if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. I analyze World War II strategy and decision-making using primary sources and academic research. Drop a comment telling me which blunder you think was most catastrophic. Was it invading the Soviet Union? Declaring war on America? Stalingrad? And here's a question. If you could change just one of these decisions, which one would have the biggest impact on the outcome? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.